And he's got galaxy upon galaxy to attend to, but he's especially concerned with what we do, and he's especially concerned with what we do while naked.
Science doesn't call it God, but what is God if not the immeasurable potential of all that was, all that is, and all that will be? Science also tells us that this is a field of non-locality, where everything is correlated with everything else.
You asked Dan what I meant by woo-woo. That is the very embodiment of woo-woo. He said, stringing together at a rapid patter of a bunch of scientific-sounding words sprinkled in with some spiritual New Age words doesn't mean anything. Good. Well, our position on the question is obviously depends on how you define it. If there really is a God, then obviously he probably or she has a future. If there is no God, then we're only really talking about the future of belief in God. Belief in belief or something like that. So my position is I don't believe in God. Obviously I can't prove a negative that there is none. On the other hand, I think as the circle of what science explains grows, more and more of the things that God used to explain are now explained through natural forces. So the expansion of naturalism as a way of explaining things has continued fairly aggressively for 4 centuries, and I think will continue to for many more centuries, and such that we'll be left with the question is what is there left for God to do? And so I think just 2 points on that is that, one, although I can't prove a negative, I can demonstrate fairly conclusively, I think, that belief in God and the kind of gods you believe in and the sorts of religions you adhere to depend very much on where you happen to have been born and in which century you happen to have been born. So if you were born 10,000 years ago or 200 years ago or 500 years from now, is very much going to shape what particular God you believe in. And so that alone tells us that there's a strong cultural component and historical component to just the concept of God. And there's nothing particularly unusual about creation myths. All cultures have them. There's nothing, then there's something. Or else it wouldn't be a creation story, would it? And most cultures have flood myths, especially cultures that are on bodies of water that flood. Lots of cultures have resurrection stories and virgin birth stories. Dionysus, a Greek god of wine, converted water into wine, drank the body and blood of the creator of the universe, and Osiris, the Egyptian god, way predating Judeo-Christian gods, had a kind of a resurrection and savior story, such that first, if the pharaoh believes in Osiris, he gets everlasting life. Then the pharaohs figured out you can employ people to build pyramids much better if you give them the promise of the afterlife also, and that expanded into basically accepting a savior type person to achieve everlasting life. So we see that happening everywhere we go. And then the second point, just to wrap it up, is that what we know from neuroscience is that we do tend to look at the world and find meaningful patterns and impose on those patterns intentional agency. And so the intentional agents are things like ghosts and gods and demons and angels and aliens and so forth. And God is another version of that. It's a projection of what our brain is doing to try to understand and make sense of the world. And all of that together, I think, is a strong several lines of evidence to show us that we created God and not vice versa.
Thank you, Michael. Deepak.
I just want to correct a few inaccuracies. I have met Michael before, but it was in a previous lifetime. Okay. Secondly, I also want to reinforce that along with what Michael said, that I'm not here to talk about belief. I think belief is a cover-up of insecurity. You only believe in things that you don't know the truth of, and you want to know the truth of. If I asked you, do you believe in electricity or electromagnetism, you would say, what kind of a ridiculous question is that? If you want to know the truth, you must have the experience, you must have a theoretical basis, and you must have the rules of science to either falsify what you're saying, that means experimentally prove it, or at least submit to what is called Occam's principle, the theory of parsimony, that the simplest explanations are the best explanations. So I'm not here to defend the God of primitive theology. which Michael Shermer has talked about. I'm not here to defend Osiris, although Gene can speak to that. I'm not here to defend Dionysus, although when he was speaking, I had the feeling that I was Dionysus once, and because I'm a reformed wine lover. Now, here's the gist of what I want to say today. We are here not to argue the validity of science. Science is the most impeccable way of understanding the rules, the laws of nature. A science that has brought us the rules of mathematics, physics, chemistry, cosmology, evolution. So we're not going to argue about that. It's irrelevant. What we are going to say is that we are here to upgrade science so that we can look at a deeper level of reality where we find an infinite intelligence, an infinite consciousness that explains to some extent the Big Bang, cosmogenesis, what is called autopoiesis, which is the formation of life from inanimate matter, and Darwinian evolution, which is about gene variation and natural selection. We are here to see how that very science can upgrade our view of theology, which is why we are calling this the future of God, an upgrading both of science and of theology that looks at God as an infinite consciousness, that looks at God as the agent of downward causation, that looks at God as the author of the Big Bang, and the first 10 to the power of minus 43 seconds of creation, which is 10 followed by a tenth of a million seconds, of which science has to say that this segment of creation is not only unknown but unknowable, because the laws of physics fail there. They disintegrate. There are no laws to speak of. And once that phase is over, 10 to the power of minus 43, then we have actually very reasonable principles of mathematics, of physics, that explain how primordial gases turn into heavy elements, and how there was the birth of carbon and hydrogen and nitrogen, and how the exact constants of creation. There are about 20 mathematical constants that are arbitrarily assigned to the laws of physics. They have no reason to be there. They are arbitrarily given, but once they are there, you can explain all of cosmogenesis. No one knows how life came from inanimate matter. Maybe one day they'll know, but once it came, then the principles of evolution apply.
We're at 3 minutes.
Done.
Okay.
The strongest evidence against Christianity is how ordinary its origin story looks when compared to other religions. Virgin births, dying and rising gods, floods, miracles, heaven, and divine judgment appear across cultures long before and outside Christianity. That points to human storytelling, not one final truth from heaven. Psychology also helps explain why people create gods. The human brain is built to detect patterns and agency, even when none exists. We see intention in storms, disease, luck, and death. Add culture, fear, and tradition, and God becomes a powerful idea humans pass down. The evidence points toward people creating gods, not gods creating people.
Well, I think as you've begun to hear, there are two very different kinds of conversations we could have here. We can talk about religion as it is, for most people most of the time, and we can talk about what religion could be, or should be, or perhaps what it is for the tiniest minority of people. And I just want you to be aware of the difference there, because it could get lost. It's true that some people define God as pure consciousness, or as being synonymous with the laws of nature. But if we talk about consciousness and the laws of nature, we won't be talking about the God that most of our neighbors believe in, which is a personal God who hears our prayers and occasionally answers them. So I just want you to be sensitive to this, because if Michael or I say something derogatory about Islam or Christianity, which seems possible, the response from the other side shouldn't mention quantum mechanics. And it shouldn't reference a notion of God that is so denuded of doctrine as to more or less be synonymous with pure mystery or pure information or pure energy or pure anything. So I wanted to plant a flag there where you all can see it. Because the God that our neighbors believe in is essentially an invisible person. He is a creator deity who created the universe to have a relationship with one species of primate. Lucky us. and he's got galaxy upon galaxy to attend to, but he's especially concerned with what we do, and he's especially concerned with what we do while naked. And he almost certainly disapproves of homosexuality. And he's created this cosmos as a vast laboratory in which to test our powers of credulity. And the test is this: can you believe in this God on bad evidence? Which is to say, on faith. And if you can, you will win an eternity of happiness after you die. And it's precisely this sort of God and this sort of scheme that you must believe in if you're going to have any kind of future in politics in this country. No matter what your gifts. I mean, you could be an unprecedented genius. You could look like George Clooney. You could have $1 billion, and you could have the social skills of Oprah, and you are going nowhere in politics in this country unless you believe in that sort of God. So we can talk about anything we want. I'm happy to talk about consciousness, but please notice that when we migrate away from the God that is really shaping human events, or the God talk that is really shaping human events in our world at this moment.
Start with you, Deepak. What scientific proof or evidence of any sort can you muster to support your assertion that there is, for lack of a better term, God or some sort of intelligence at the heart of the universe?
Before I answer that, I think I want to say something, address something that Sam Harris said. He said God is very concerned about what we're doing naked. Well, what we're doing naked is the very mechanics of creation. So we don't have to be embarrassed about. Sometimes, at least now, yes, sometimes. Okay, what scientific proof? I think science is, and again, in deference to Sam Harris, he said, don't go the way of quantum physics. I think I'm going to have to say that science is now in a process of overthrowing the climactic overthrow of the superstition of materialism. That everything that we call matter comes from something that is not material. That the essential nature of the physical world is that it's not physical. That the essential stuff of the universe is non-stuff. Call it what you will. And science also tells us, and if there are any scientists who want to disagree with them, please come up during the question and answer session. Science tells us that nature is a discontinuity, that it's an on-off phenomenon, that there are gaps between every two ons, where you find a field of possibilities, a field of pure potentiality. Science doesn't call it God, but what is God if not the immeasurable potential of all that was, all that is, and all that will be? Science also tells us that this is a field of non-locality, where everything is correlated with everything else. My adversaries are going to point out, no, everything, God is explained by neurology. Well, I hope today, Michael, that you will convert from a skeptic to a neuroskeptic, because your science is really frozen in the dungeons of conservatism and in the dungeons of orthodoxy. Today, science tells us that the essential nature of reality is non-local correlation. Everything is connected to everything else. That there's hidden creativity. There are quantum leaps of creativity. That there's something called the observer effect, where intention orchestrates space-time events, which we then measure as movement and motion and energy and matter. And addressing Sam, we can have a personal relationship with this intelligence, because we have a consciousness that is part of this sea of consciousness. Rumi, the great Sufi poet, said, you're not just a drop in the ocean, you're the mighty ocean in the drop. And all you have to do is understand the principles of science and understand that you have within you the resources to intuitively grasp this mystery. But one of the things we have to do today...
Did you hear anything in there that convinces you?
You asked Dan what I meant by woo-woo. That is the very embodiment of woo-woo. He said, stringing together at a rapid patter of a bunch of scientific sounding words sprinkled in with some spiritual New Age words doesn't mean anything. I mean, just take one example of this non-local quantum effects. We're all connected. No, this is not true. When quantum physicists talk about non-locality and the interconnectedness of things, they're talking about things at the quantum level.
Wait, well, let me just stop you for a second, because I will play the dummy tonight, because it's not a hard role for me to assume. What does non-local mean? I mean, I kind of understand what quantum physics means, but just give it to me really simply.
Okay. There's this very simple two-slit experiment where you fire these photons through, and if you just have two streams of light, they form a little interference wave pattern, like throwing two rocks in a pond.
You've already confused.
Okay, and so it. Yeah, you want to interrupt?
He's getting into the woo-woo now.
No, this is just you. Okay, what he means by what he means by non-local is that everything in the universe is interconnected, and it just is not true. It just isn't.
And there's no reason to think that it's active at the level of the brain. That non-locality is a principle that is working. Hold on, Deepak, you spoke for quite some time.
When someone says God is consciousness or God is quantum energy, they are moving the goalpost away from the God people actually pray to. Quantum physics does show strange behavior, especially with entangled particles, but it does not prove a cosmic mind, divine intention, or Christian truth. The 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics honored experiments on entanglement because they helped build quantum information science, not theology. Non-locality is about measurable correlations between quantum systems. Turning that into everything is spiritually connected is wordplay, not evidence.
The deeper point to make here, and what is...
But I want to address that brain thing that you just said.
Okay,
Let's finish.
You might not have to, because the deeper point here, and this is where the whole style and content of what you're saying is so deeply unscientific, is that there's not a physicist sitting on this stage right now. Okay, I would never be tempted to lecture a room full of 1,000 people at Caltech about physics. I'm not a physicist. You're not a physicist. And basically every sentence demonstrates that you speak on the subject. Now, please don't take this as ad hominem. I mean, I'm talking about specifically what you said. But the fact, what you do and what many people who try to invoke spooky physics do in the service of propping up their religious and New Age intuitions is that they think that because what you're saying, because quantum mechanics is spooky and difficult to understand, and because what you're saying is spooky and difficult to understand, they must somehow be related, or they must somehow be mutually supportive. And that's fundamentally not true. They are arrived at by completely different methodologies and ways of thinking and criteria of discursive evidence. What a mystic, I've studied with great mystics. I've met great meditation masters who've spent 20 years in caves perfecting the kinds of techniques of meditation that you would adopt or recommend. They don't know a damn thing about physics. And they're not interested, for the most part, in physics. I mean, there's nothing about sitting in a cave and granted, having incredibly useful and even normative experiences and transforming your way of life and transforming your moment-to-moment perception of the world. There's nothing about that project that makes you a theoretical physicist. And so these are completely different language games. They're completely, and you have just merge them together in a very unprincipled way, and you're getting
well, no, I take resentment at your questioning my scientific credentials. In fact, if anyone on this stage is more scientifically credentialed, it's me. I took physics, chemistry, biology. I'm an MD. I'm a neuroendocrinologist. And I want to object to your saying that brain does not obey non-locality. You know, when you're thinking right now, 100 trillion neurons are phase locking and frequency locking in simultaneously. Is that non-locality or not?
Okay, can I just have...
I just want to quote from Einstein. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. From Stephen Hawking. It would be very difficult to explain why the universe would have begun in just this way, except as the act of a God who intended to create beings like us.
But Hawking's an atheist.
Please
look up those. This is a direct quote.
So what? He has stated, Hawking has stated on this very stage, he does not believe in God.
Well, he doesn't believe in the dead white male that you're talking about, the straw man that you have put up, or the mythical God that Sam Harris is talking about.
The God you put up is a meaningless, non-local God.
No, I just said, this is also the God that gives us inspiration, insight, creativity, free will, conscious choice making, imagination. Are your neurons doing that, or are you doing that?
As just a point of process here,
well,
could you dial it down just a little bit? First of all, I invite everyone to look up that Einstein quote in Ideas and Opinions, read it in context. It'll be absolutely obvious. It can't be pressed into the service that you just witnessed. Einstein complained about this treatment of his metaphorical use of the word God and the few things he said about religion, and you can look that up in Richard Dawkins' book. This is a game, and it's a game that is designed for export to people who don't know much science and don't know how science is done. And you missed the point of, I wasn't criticizing your scientific credentials. You're an endocrinologist, you're an MD, you're not a theoretical physicist. The way science is done is when
theoretical physicists in this audience to actually address these questions.
Okay, so a theoretical physicist will be comfortable talking with real confidence in a very narrow band of his expertise, and he will be exquisitely sensitive to the fact that when he's in a room like this, or she, sorry. I'll just proceed with he just for simplicity's sake here. He will be exquisitely sensitive to the fact that whenever he opens his mouth in a room like this, he is guaranteed to be speaking in front of half a dozen people who know more on any given issue than he does. The great irony of the popular conception of science as arrogant is that when you go to a scientific meeting, you don't see arrogance. You're about as likely to see real arrogance as you're likely to see nudity at a scientific conference. This is people are constantly offering caveats and hedges toward what they say. Every statement is couched in, I'm sure there's someone in the room who knows more about this than me, but because everyone is desperate to avoid public embarrassment. Now, this seems to be something you're not doing.
If I was worried about being embarrassed, I wouldn't be actually influencing the people that I'm influencing. And I can also say something right now is that I agree that, science is about a very specific methodology, but for people like Michael, not you so much, but people like Michael, to take all of inner experience, all of the rich inner experience, and try to codify it in a graph with data is absurd.
As opposed to what? Just calling it fuzzy words? How does that help us understand
That's such an out, Michael. That's such an out. Use the words fuzzy, use the words woo-woo, and you're out of the argument.
I'll give you a technical explanation. When you talk about the observer effect and the uncertainty principle, this is how subatomic particles are altered by looking at them, by bombarding them with light, for example, because they're so small. And so you look at it or you don't look at it, and that changes the nature of what you're looking at. But the moon is really there whether you look at it or not. It doesn't apply to the macro world.
In the absence of a conscious entity, the moon remains a radically ambiguous and ceaselessly flowing quantum soup.
Deepak, that is...
That you have to have a conscious being.
The moon?
Yes.
Okay, listen to the sounds.
You have been, let's just say, dismissive of what Deepak has said thus far about the notion that there is something more than this. How can you be so sure that there isn't? And I know it's hard to prove a negative, if not impossible. But what? Give me some evidence to support your contention that this is it.
Religious defenders often borrow words from science because plain faith has no testable evidence. Quoting Einstein does not rescue the argument. Einstein rejected the idea of a personal God who answers prayers or controls human events. He used God as a metaphor for the order of nature, which is completely different from Christianity. The observer effect also gets misused here. In quantum physics, observation means measurement by a physical device or interaction, not a human mind magically shaping reality. Turning physics into proof of God is not science. It is religious branding placed on concepts that already work without God.
Well, for example, I can't prove that there isn't something else that I don't know that there isn't. Huh? I mean, it's like the difference between something invisible and something non-existent. Well, it's zero and we can't study it. But if you take something specific like Gene's excellent comment there, we actually have a pretty good scientific understanding now based on evolutionary theory and evolutionary psychology that if you expand the circle of sentiments to include other people as honorary members of your tribe, you're less likely to kill them. And so, like, for example, tried and true game theory kind of data in the real world of opening up economic borders, you're less likely to bomb countries that make your cars and computers. That's a form of trade that makes you feel like somebody else is an honorary member of your tribe. Well, that has very deep evolutionary reasons that we've now come to understand in just the last few decades by applying the methods of science to something with a real social consequences. And we can derive that from data and tests and game theory models and so forth. So just in terms of what we can operationally define carefully so that we're all talking about the same thing and then go measure it or test it or experiment with it or try it. I mean, one of the great things about democracy, liberal democracy, it's kind of a scientific experiment. Let's try this, let's try that. This state has this taxation system, this one has that taxation system. It's like an experiment. And so I think what you described, Gene, as the expanding circle of sentiments to include women is a result of the Enlightenment experiment that let's try that. Let's see if that produces greater prosperity and wealth and happiness and joy for more people in more places, and it worked. And that's a rational, reasonable approach.
One thing I'd like to add to that is I think it's ironic to score women's rights for your side of the ledger here in this conversation, because there's been no greater obstacle to empowering women in human history than religion. Certainly the three monotheists. I mean, when you...
Sam, to my ear at least, neither Gene nor Deepak is advocating religion as you understand.
That's true, and that's why I said what I said at the beginning. That the issue here, I mean, what kind of conversation should we have, and how will this conversation be construed by people in the audience, by people seeing this on television? And the reality is that the kind of talk and the kind of invocations of science that Deepak is offering here is received by a great number of people who believe a lot of unjustified, very myth-laden stuff that has been handed down to us.
You're making that statement without qualifying it, without giving any proof of it. Give me some proof that what I'm saying is what he says is woo-woo, just because he can't understand it.
Okay.
Every discipline has its vocabulary.
It's okay. If you're going to say that non-locality is an operable principle in neuroscience, that is woo-woo right now
It's
in
not.
neuroscience.
It's
That
a
is
principle in morphogenesis and differentiation. It's a principle in the workings of the pacemaker of your heart, where 100 pacemaker
Deepak,
cells fire simultaneously,
it's just not
non-locally.
Saying it louder and relentlessly is not going to make it true. To answer your question, Dan, I want to get back to something that actually matters. The people, 90% of the people watching this on television will never have heard of non-locality, and if we could explain it to them, they're not going to care about it. They're worried about Jesus. They're worried about the collision with the Muslim world. They're worried about gay marriage. I mean, this is religion talk, and we're talking about the future of God. Now,
That's the past of God. Right?
Okay, so I'm happy to move on from that, but let's first acknowledge that that's the context. That's why we're having this conversation. The reason why we're talking about God is for the last 4,000 years, people have been handing books to their children saying, all these other books were written by people, but this book is a magic book. It could not possibly have been written by a human being.
I think...
And so now we're here talking about God and the future of God.
So you think that's the past of God, and what is
I
the
think
future?
we can comfortably say that what Sam is talking about, one reason we are having this conversation is that this conversation will lead to other conversations which can say, been there, done that. Let's move on. And the future of God is to understand how a new understanding of science, a new understanding of the perennial wisdom traditions, otherwise called woo-woo, actually can lead to more compassion, to more love, to more kindness, to more tolerance, to more peace, to more insight, to more inspiration, to more creativity. So we become the conscious beings through which the universe will take its next leap in evolution. That's the future.
What sounds so bad about that future?
Well, but all of that is good. You should be doing those things anyway, whether or not there's a God or a great spirit or a non-locality.
And related to that, and that's a very good point. But what we find is that I tends to tend to thou more than I attends to it. And it's that whole question of having that personal I-thou relationship. I once studied with Martin Buber, who was, by the way, this tall and his beard was that long. And he talked about this sense of personal relationship being dynamic in the spiritual experience. Now, at the same time, what we find, it's fascinating, we are living in the time in which we sit zazen, we flirt with Sufism and Buddhism and its many, many different ideologies. And is this cafeteria religion, or is it people finding in the great repast of spiritual knowings, the wisdom traditions of many places, finding their own place, slowly but surely, in their own spiritual life?
Okay, but Gene, so that scheme, I agree with you about that scheme. There are many people having these remarkable experiences in every traditional context. That, in and of itself, proves that all of these religions are wrong. All of these religions claim their exclusive validity. And the fact that you have Christians having deep experiences of peace, and you have Muslims, and you have atheists, and you have Buddhists, it proves that there's a deeper principle that should be talked about in a non-sectarian way that is not held hostage by Iron Age literature. I mean, that... Okay,
no, that's a very important point.
We need a scientific discourse on the possibilities of human well-being.
Sure.
And you can get as esoteric as you want there. You can talk about self-transcendence. You can talk about the ego being an illusion. You can ask, what is the relationship between consciousness and the rest of the physical world? And the truth is, when you get out to some of those fringe areas, you are getting to an area of real scientific ignorance. And the first thing you want to do in the spirit of intellectual honesty is admit ignorance, not claim that you, by closing your eyes, can realize your identity with the entire cosmos and the origin of you go get before the Big Bang with your unguarded intuitions. I mean, that's not how you discover what happened.
Religion keeps trying to claim credit for morality, but history shows progress often happens when people challenge religious authority, not obey it. Women's rights, gay rights, free speech, and freedom of conscience advanced through law, science, activism, and secular human rights, not ancient scripture. The Bible itself tells wives to submit to husbands in Ephesians 5:22 and tells women to remain quiet in church in 1 Corinthians 14:34. Those are not timeless moral truths. They are ancient social rules. If morality improves when we move beyond scripture, then morality does not come from God. It comes from humans learning to reduce harm and expand freedom.
And it's also who you and I have been talking to, who will give very different perspectives on this. I think the big issue here in the future of God is that the reset button of history has been hit, and that we are in times such as we have never had before. And that in such times, I am finding people moving to a sense of radical empathy, not just with others' sensibilities and points of view, without which we will perish, you see, and you take a very different point of view, but that we are also, I think, expanding our sensibility of what we have called transcendence, grace, love, compassion, and as we do this, I think that there is being created in the world and time today a very unique and emergent spirituality, and with it a new story. I mean, that's what I have to hold to in the work that I do around the world, that there's a new story. I mean, let's take myth, for example. Now, I use myth differently than superstition. I think that a myth is something that never was, but is always happening. It's almost like the coded DNA of the human mind-brain system. And I travel to countries where I see the stories changing. As, for example, I was in India, and they were showing that the Ramayana about, it's the great core story of India. And as we watched, the people came in, they tied up their water buffalo, they sat down, and here was the story of Rama and Sita being rescued. And the old Brahmin lady sitting next to me, she said, "Oh, I don't like Princess Sita. She's much too passive. We women in India, we're much stronger than that. We have to change the story." And I said, "Madam, the story is at least 3,000 years old." She said, "All the more reason why we have to change it. My name is Sita. My husband's name is Rama. He's a lazy bun. Anything happened, I'd have to rescue him." And I was watching the changing of the story in its mythic structure. The story is moving, I believe, from my experience around the world. I think it's moving to men and women together as part of the heroic journey. I think it's moving to people in many, many different cultures, and it is about the saving, if you will, of this beautiful planet in this, its most critical moment in human history. And that's the new story.
Gene, you know that nowhere in human discourse is there a greater impediment to changing the story than in religion. I mean, the story doesn't change. The Ramayana is not going to get rewritten based on that conversation.
You're talking about cultural mythology, not religion.
I'm talking
not the religious
I'm talking
experience.
About the Bible, the Quran.
That's all cultural mythology.
The organizing doctrines by which 99% of the people on earth who call themselves religious
still
are
the past. Still the past.
Lives.
We have the internet. We have ABC News. We can change that conversation.
Yeah, that is the purpose of conversations like this. But it seems to me that if you want to move forward and reinvent God and actually have it be relevant to people and have your word God, I mean, I don't know why you'd be tempted to use the word God. If in
Generation,
fact you don't
organization, delivery.
Please. It seems to me that you are happily being misunderstood in your use of the word God. You know that
actually sad
that vast numbers of people care about God for a multiplicity of reasons, most of which you don't want to defend on this stage. But why use the word God? Why not just talk about
I just told you it's an acronym.
No, Deepak.
Well, I have to say, sorry for being so combative. That was because of Michael Shermer, but I actually agree. I actually agree with almost everything you've said, Sam. I have no disagreement with the deeper truth that you're hinting at. I'm just saying is that this conversation needs to take place in a setting such as this, where it can lead to other conversations, so that this is not a debate but a dialectic where through these contradictory points of view we arrive at a greater truth.
Okay. But you are carrying around a tremendous amount of ballast from the past, and you are describing it as somehow necessary equipment. So, for instance, you talked about these great wisdom traditions, that he is so callously dismissed out of his own ignorance. You go to these great wisdom traditions, right? And you consult, I mean, and you're talking about changing the story. And so what does it mean to change the story in Islam? Let's just talk about facts. You open the Quran. In the 4th chapter, it says disobedient wives should be whipped by their husbands. Okay, so this is what
it says that in the Old Testament, all kinds of things. It says that
absolutely
in
does.
the Hindu book
Deepak, I'm just picking Islam as an example.
Why? It's true of all religions.
Okay, then I can pick Judaism. Would you be more comfortable if I pick Judaism as an example? It's the same. Yes, all of these books are litanies of barbarous practices. But the point is that the way Muslims are now constrained to change the story is they can't change the Quran. The Quran is the perfect word of the creator of the universe. They have to parse the word whipped, and the most enlightened of them have to say things like, well, it doesn't actually mean you take out the bullwhip and you whip her. It could be a kind of a ceremonial kind of patting, just a brief chastisement that doesn't actually hurt. And so you get a range, but nowhere in that range do you get real equity and real compassion and real understanding between the sexes. And to get that, you have to admit, okay, this is barbarous nonsense that we should just disregard. And religion doesn't give you the tools to do that. And God talk is either profoundly misleading or unhelpful, or it's just part of the problem.
So to your minds, is there any future of God that you could be comfortable with? A God, say, defined the way Deepak defines it.
Well, so he's sort of redefining it in his own particular way, in which everybody would have to agree. And then, I guess my point is, why hinge it to all the woo-woo stuff? Why hinge it to things that are just fuzzy words? We can actually get right down to understanding what's going on with things like compassion and emotion.
Science does not explain why we're here. It doesn't answer a lot of the big questions.
Oh, okay, but that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that we can't at least try to understand. I mean, the whole point of science is to try to get down and drill in and figure out what's going on. So we can use words like, it'd be better if we were all compassionate and loving to one another and so on. Of course, who would disagree? But what we want to know as scientists is, well, how do you actually implement that? What are the sorts of things we can do that increase that in people? Well, we have to understand what's going on when somebody has affections for somebody else. So, for example, if you have an exchange with another human, a stranger, in which you give them something and they give you something back and it's a positive thing, there's a little spike in oxytocin. Oxytocin is an attachment hormone discovered with nursing mothers and then expanded to, it turns out anytime you touch somebody else, there's a little oxytocin there. So anything we can do to increase oxytocin is a good thing, and that makes people like each other. So there, I've not taken anything away from the beauty of love and the emotional appreciation, but we now have an understanding of the mechanics of it, and therefore you can structure some kind of social system in which there's more of that, not spraying it in the air, but actually having people exchange things in a positive way, like trade, increases oxytocin, and there's nothing wrong with knowing that. It doesn't take anything away from the story.
I'm not sure how I know this, but I think Deepak wants to say something.
The word God keeps getting used to protect old beliefs from criticism. When the evidence gets weak, religion changes the meaning. God becomes love, energy, mystery, consciousness, or compassion. But we can study compassion without pretending it comes from heaven. Neuroscience links trust and bonding to real biological systems, including oxytocin, which has been shown to increase social trust in human experiments. That does not remove the beauty of love. It removes the need for a supernatural explanation. If kindness can be explained through biology, culture, and cooperation, then religion is adding a story on top of reality.
Oxytocin is not love. Oxytocin is the measurement of love in a laboratory.
No.
Just like
You're
H2O,
no.
knowing the formula H2O is not the experience of water.
Deepak,
Okay?
this experiment has been run.
I know it has been run. What does it prove,
the
though?
control is that you give oxytocin to people and then they become
Because
more
both
generous.
oxytocin
It is
and
the
the
drug of
experience of love are interdependent.
This is semantic.
It's not a causal relationship is not the same thing as correlation.
Deepak,
You know,
there are different levels
if
of
I go to a
describing
picnic
ourselves.
and there are ants all the time, that doesn't mean ants cause the picnic.
Okay, let me just explain the experiment. So, two people in a game.
I know the experiment,
but
Michael.
wait, I have to say it. Two people.
This is the kind of woo-woo you guys promote to prove your so-called science.
I don't know the
Woo is
experiment, so let him tell the experiment.
Yeah, let me tell you. Okay, so you have two people in an exchange game, and they make an offer to each other. And if it's fairly equitable and generous, they feel good about each other. You draw their blood, and there's a spike in oxytocin. Now, is that because oxytocin is the result of the positive interaction, or is it the cause? So the control was you give them a little, before the experiment, you give them a little hit of oxytocin with nose spray. It's done to induce labor in pregnant women. And Paul Zak did this research, and sure enough, any subjects that got a spike in oxytocin from the nose spray were more generous than those that didn't get the spike.
But if I said I love you and it meant something to you, you would also release oxytocin.
Yeah.
So does the thought create the molecule, or the molecule create the thought? Are they simultaneous expressions of a deeper, transcendent reality that we are inseparable?
Ask him.
Can I just jump in here? All right. Okay, well, I think we should wander off the specifics of oxytocin. He's just described an experiment where you can actually answer that question. If I give you a shot of oxytocin and it changes your level of trust, then it's not just mere correlation. I mean, we've run it both ways.
But I can increase trust, and it can generate oxytocin too.
But if trust is just the brain in one state, then you have the brain influencing its future states. You haven't gotten out of the brain and got do we have souls or some that our mind is somehow independent of the brain that will lift off the brain at death and go elsewhere? Is that
I believe there's a transcendent core consciousness that is comprised of meanings, context, relationships, archetypal ideas that recycles itself, just like everything else recycles itself.
So it's in no sense a product of the brain.
It's no sense a product of the brain, and our whole endeavor in spiritual discipline is to actually go beyond that personal consciousness, that ego consciousness, so we can identify with that transcendent reality, which is the source of space, time, energy, and everything else that exists.
Okay, you put a lot on the table. So Deepak just said some very seems a strange word to use, but some concrete things that science can criticize. Okay, you just said that consciousness and mind are...
I didn't say consciousness and mind. I said mind is a product of consciousness.
Okay, but this subjectivity is independent of the objectivity of the brain.
There is a subjectivity which is independent of objects. But there's subjectivity which is subjectivity of itself. When you're looking at the brain for consciousness, you're not looking at consciousness. You're looking at synaptic firings. In fact, it is your consciousness that is looking at those synaptic firings.
All right. Let's just keep that in view. All right. Now, you've said there are two things that an incomplete science of consciousness and the mind should want to say about that. One is that having an experience of undivided consciousness does not tell you what consciousness really is or what its relationship to the brain really is. There's nothing about introspection that leads you to sense that your subjectivity is at all dependent or even related to voltage changes and chemical interactions going on inside your head. Okay, you can feel, you can drop acid, you can meditate for a year, you can do whatever you want to perturb your nervous system. You can feel yourself to be one with the universe, and at no point in that transformation do you get a glimpse that there's 100 trillion neurons in your head or synapses in your head that are doing anything.
It's called binding.
No, it's not. It's called absolute subjective ignorance of what's actually going on outside your consciousness.
You're
You're so Deepak,
you're so dismissive of subjective experience.
I'm not remotely dismissive of it.
To poetry, to music, to art. So dismissive of subjectivity. I'm saying that the whole universe is imbued with subjectivity.
There's nothing more important than subjectivity. It's all we could possibly care about. The fabric of our experience, the changes in our conscious experience, are all we care about. And they have some relation to the physical universe.
Absolutely.
Okay, now the
We
question is...
give rise to the physical universe.
Okay, that is a statement of metaphysics that is totally unjustified and cannot possibly be
That's
justified.
why it's a statement of metaphysics, not of
on-
physics.
No, metaphysical statements also have to be justified, as it turns out.
Metaphysics statements come from subjective experiences.
All right, you're starting to lose me a little bit.
The soul claim falls apart when the brain is damaged. If consciousness were a separate spiritual substance, brain injury should not rewrite memory, personality, impulse control, or moral judgment. But neuroscience shows the opposite. Damage to the frontal lobes can change behavior and personality, and the famous Phineas Gage case helped reveal that link. Oxytocin research also shows trust can be shifted by changing brain chemistry. That is terrible news for religion. Love, trust, identity, and moral behavior track the brain, not an invisible soul waiting to float away after death.
I've let it go. But let's rein it back in. I'm just curious with you tonight. I tried to go down this road with you before, but you didn't really bite, so I'm going to try it again. Are you, I think the question that a lot of people have for guys like you, atheists, agnostics, is, are you comfortable with not, you must be therefore comfortable with not knowing the answers to big questions, or you have some sort of confidence that there is nothing more that most other people don't have?
Well, twofold. One, yes, by temperament, I'm comfortable not knowing the big answers to the big questions. It's okay to say, I don't know. And just live with it. Believe it or not, that's okay. And
you believe that when Deepak comes up with theories that you would call woo-woo, that he is just simply at his core, whether he knows it or not, uncomfortable not knowing?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think he likes to layer on the language of science because it seems to ground it in something a little more concrete than just woo. And what we're saying here is that you don't need to do that. You don't need to hinge it to all this jargon, because values like love and tolerance for differences and expanding the circle of sentiments to include more people, those are values that stand in and of themselves, because people have value as an end in themselves, not as a means to an end. And that's an enlightenment value that's derived from scientific and reason and rational principles for the last 500 years. And you don't have to take all of that layer and put it on there that most people wouldn't understand anyway, and it just confuses things.
Is your rock-solid certitude about there not being a God in and of itself a form of orthodoxy?
Well, I'm not rock solid that there is no God. I would be surprised at this point, I have to say. If it was anything like Yahweh, I'd be shocked. But I actually have a little thing I would say if it turned out to be the case, what I would say standing there at the pearly gates.
All right, what is it?
Oh, well, I mean, first of all, it would be, you gave me this brain in your own image that it reasons and doubts and so on, and so I applied it to you. And so, in any case, why does belief matter? Shouldn't it matter more how you comport yourself in life and how you treat other people? And
but Deepak, and I'll get to you in just 1 second. But Deepak's point is that molecules don't feel compassion.
Right.
That ethics and love and compassion and empathy are all, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, evidence that can be marshaled in support of an argument for divine.
It is impossible, and Roger Penrose and John Searle would substantiate this. It is impossible for a physical system, no matter how complex it is, to process meaning, to process creativity, to process purpose, to process even, you can map it out, you can show the molecules there, but it is impossible for a physical system to feel those qualities.
Okay, that's simply not true. It's what is true to say is that we don't understand how that is being accomplished, and we don't. And even I'll give you even more than that. We don't understand what the relationship between consciousness and matter is. Now, for instance, if electrons
I'll
were
grant you
conscious,
that, by the way, what you just corrected me on.
So but it's not. There's no reason. It gets you nothing to say it's impossible in science.
Well, I'm just saying that very prominent researchers like John Searle and
You're-
Roger Penrose have made those explicit statements.
Okay, but they're in a much larger conversation. They have more detractors than could fit in this hall. These are areas of genuine scientific uncertainty. But what is obvious is that the way to clarify this domain is not to pretend to know things you don't know.
Well, I'm sorry.
And you're saying. Again, I want to bring Gene in.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm sorry if I gave the impression that I don't know, that I pretend to know things that I don't know. I'm just offering a possible hypothesis. That's why we're calling it the future of God. And I stand corrected.
Okay, so when you
So
say,
I'd like to talk about this.
if I could just tie him down to this one statement though, because this seems like new information. If you're saying that when you say we are on a continuum, the consciousness that I experience in myself is the creator of the universe, which you said about 5 minutes ago.
You see, creator is a very anthropomorphic.
Okay, I just want, is that however you said it, is that a hypothesis? Or because you said it as just a blanket assertion, this is a fact.
I think
that I'm ignorant of.
See, there are three ways of knowing. One is through empirical observation, what we call the eyes of the flesh. Then there's a deeper knowing, comes from the eyes of the mind. If I want to understand the theorem of Pythagoras, it's activity of the mind. Why does mathematics, for example, describe so precisely the activity of nature? It's one of the most astounding puzzles of the universe. And then there is a deeper knowing, which is the eyes of the soul. What's his name? William Blake said, we are led to believe a lie when we see with and not through the eye that was born in a night to perish in the night while the soul slept in beams of light. So what I'm saying is,
but that's why William Blake is not a great scientist.
Of knowing. We need a synthesis of knowing which combines empirical observation, a deeper knowing that comes from the mind and from the soul.
But I want to hear.
The honest atheist position is simple. Saying, I don't know, is better than inventing God to cover the gap. Christianity claims to know the Creator, the purpose of life, the afterlife, sin, salvation, and judgment. Yet those claims still depend on faith instead of measurable proof. Science works the opposite way. Consciousness remains difficult, but research keeps tying awareness to brain networks, anesthesia, sleep, injury, and measurable neural activity. The unknown is not a permission slip for religion. It is a reason to keep investigating. God adds certainty where the evidence has not earned it. So here's the question. When we face the biggest mysteries, consciousness, morality, and the universe, is it more honest to say we don't know yet, or to call the mystery God? Comment your answer below, and do not forget to like and subscribe.